Hey, everybody. Welcome back to You Are What You Love. Today, my guest is Alex C. Telander. He is the creator and writer for Circe in the Ostium podcast network. And I'm very excited to have him on today because we are talking about a piece of media that I think was quite influential for a number of people. And if you listened to the Twin Peaks episode a couple of weeks ago, I think you're going to have fun today. So please welcome Alex to the podcast.
Oh, Marissa, thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's really an honor to get to be on here and talk about one of my favorite things in the world.
I'm very excited to have you on. I know we talked about this a little bit before we got started, but we've chatted on the internet for like years and been sort of in similar circles through the audio fiction kind of space. So it's exciting to nobody else can see you, but I can see you. So well, we can just dive right into it. What are we talking about today? What is the piece of media that changed your life?
Today we are talking about The X-Files, which was a forming show in my history. I know from watching previous episodes of the show that you'd like to ask, when did you first discover, when did you first come across it? And so I started thinking over the last week or so, like, when was it? And the big deal with The X-Files is in the first episode called Pilot, the first screen they show of where the I want to believe stuff usually is the following events are based on, true events sort of thing. This might be true stuff, and stuff like, and I'm just trying to remember, like, I can't even remember what house I was in because it was when I was a kid, when I was like a young teenager, I think it was. But I just remember seeing that and that being like, well, that sounds cool. And that was like my door opening to, oh, what could this world be? What are we being introduced to here?
Yeah, The X-Files is so well known, even for people who haven't watched it. Like, I've been aware of The X-Files my whole life, even though I literally just watched the first season, like, in 2022.
For the first time?
Yeah, for the first time. I will put this out there. I've said this before. Every time we've done anything that has even vague horror notions, I am not very fond of being scared. So I do not actively seek it out. But one of my really good friends, she was actually on the podcast for our Star Trek episode. Her name's Christiane. It is one of her favorite TV shows. So I finally was like, I'll try and do it.
That one I did listen to and really enjoyed too, because I'm a Trekkie as well.
Yeah, Star Trek is honestly, actually, we've got new content coming out. That fandom is never going to not be served, and it's a wonderful one to be a part of.
So when I was just kind of thinking back, for when it started for me. So I was born and grew up in Spain on the South Coast. And so our TV we got, I can't remember how we got it, was basically British TV.
Okay.
And so in the distant times of my mind, basically of like what I was starting to watch it, I don't know how much I was watching it or how much we were getting it. Like early 90s, the show started in 93. So I feel like, early to mid 90s is probably when I started watching some stuff of it. But I don't remember how many episodes I was getting or things like that, how regularly it was up. I remember just being exposed to some of it and being interested in it. But it's all just kind of hazy and cloudy in the dark past there. But then when I came over here for college it was spring 98 was my first semester, and then spring 99 I started at Long Beach State and really started in the dorms there where I didn't know anyone. And so I'd just go down in the residence hall to the TV room basically and hang out there every night doing homework. And this was, I think, after season 5, so they were able to get reruns on stuff.
Okay.
And I was just watching it. It was like at least one episode every night, maybe a few episodes. And that's where I just really started just like absorbing it all and watching it nonstop.
Were you watching it with other people in the kind of common area or sort of like camped out hoping someone might come in?
At first it was just me. And then I was thinking it was also like people started saying, hey, there's that guy that's always there watching X-Files. And people started hanging out a little bit. And I started making friends that way. And then the really cool thing is a girl I met, I don't remember how exactly I met her and stuff, but we got to be friendly. Long story short, I got to go visit her in her dorm. And on her wall was a poster of the X-Files.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like, oh. And on my wall, I had the I Want to Believe poster. And so we started getting friendly, and then we started dating. And next year, we'll be celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary.
Oh my God. That's amazing. This is actually, you know what? I'm very excited about this because you did mention this when we were chatting, but about having you on. But like, this is our first episode where we get to talk about a fandom related romance. So I am quite excited about it because they are more common than you would think. Well, one thing that I have been trying to do in general, because I've noticed I've gotten some feedback from people that they're listening to episodes even when they don't know what the show, like what the actual content is about. So I think a lot of times people are listening and then finding their new sort of hyperfixation, which is great. But all of that being said, what would you say The X-Files is about for people who haven't actually watch the show?
It's kind of like a newer version of Unsolved Mysteries. It's,
Mm.
looking for answers to what you don't know, the supernatural, the unexplained, whatever it might be. And what's interesting is the two characters. So you have Fox Mulder, who his sister disappeared and he thought she got abducted, or he thinks she got abducted by aliens, basically, when he was a kid. So he's basically on, a mission to find the truth. And then he's partnered up literally in the first episode with Dana Scully, who is kind of put on there. He's also known as Spooky Mulder. He's known as in the Bureau. And she's put on there to kind of like rein him in a bit and keep control on what he's doing so that he's not just going on crazy wild cases. And she's a doctor and a pure scientist and, is grounded in reason. But along the way, she kind of moves more towards his side a little bit. And just as he's moving a little more towards her side. So they kind of work so well as a dichotomy, working with each other to try and find answers to what's going on here with these mysteries.
Do you kind of lean more towards the I believe or the I'm a skeptic side of alien behavior?
What's funny is I thought about this question too, because it's like, oh, I got to pick one, don't I? And it's like I've always been a Mulder guy too, but I also love Scully, and it's like, but I realized it's actually both of them.
Okay.
And again, I think this was influential with me as a younger teenager. I really got into alien abduction stuff, ghosts, the supernatural, all this stuff. And there was a point where it was just like, oh, I know for me at least, it's all pretty much made up. I don't think there's much truth to it.
Mhm.
And that's when the science kind of took over. Of understanding science and how things work and how they all fit together. So I realized then it's really both of them. It's the, Mulder's drive to want to know and try and find out, but also Scully's grounding in science and knowing there's a bedrock that you've got to work from here. But again, also some things are still unexplained and can't always be explained by science.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like you fit within what makes their relationship so interesting, which is like the war
Hmm.
between both.
Yep.
Because there are moments in that show where Scully's right, and there are moments in that show where Mulder's right, and there's the delicious part of it is sort of like the parts where you aren't sure, the parts where the unexplained does come up, and it's just enough to keep you kind of going, which is sort of the conflict of the show and the relationship.
And the creators and the writers for the show, Chris Carter and so on, knew exactly what they were doing because there's some points where Mulder will see that UFO, whatever, and then it'll fly away, and then Scully
Yeah.
will show up and be like, "What I miss?"
Yes, I those are my favorite moments where you're just like, "Oh, if you just gotten here a second earlier. If you just gotten here a second earlier."
Yep.
Do you remember I know you said you don't remember the exact moment you kind of started watching the show, but it was probably when you were younger in Spain. Do you remember, like, the moment that hooked you to the show? Like, the thing that got you really connected to it?
Again, I don't think it was anything specific. I think it was more just the general, like, I hadn't seen a show like this before where it was this drive to try to find and explain things and understand things that are going on, especially, as I was saying, with my interest at that point in my time when I was interested in the supernatural and just all these different things and reading I was actually reading a lot of horror, Christopher Pike and Stephen King and stuff like that. So that was like feeding all into that and just wanting to enjoy this show that was like trying to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mention horror because the show to me, as someone who watched it later in life,
Hmm.
it is even though it was made in the 90s, like it really does still maintain the sort of fear factor, the creep factor of the show, which I think is interesting because a lot of times stuff that comes from just by aging, just in general, the as sort of VFX gets better and as different types of storytelling become fast-paced or kind of higher budget or just the
Hmm.
capability of technology, sometimes those shows don't maintain the creep factor because you can sort of see through it, right? But The X-Files to me really does maintain it, actually.
Yeah, well, and it was especially going into the second season and future seasons. I mean, it was literally called the Monster of the Week. I mean,
Mhm.
I think they kind of came up with that term too of whatever weird creature baddie thing was going to be happening. And then you had the arc series of like whatever was going on with the alien stuff that you'd have like a usually about 6 episodes per season, beginning, middle, and end sort of thing that would kind of try and explain more, even though they never really explained it that well. And if you look back and try to take it all apart, it doesn't hold up at all.
Yeah, I think, that's the part where I think almost it's like the belief part that they want you to just keep
Hmm.
please stop,
Yep.
please stop trying to figure it out. Just we told you that they're real. And that's it.
Yeah, a little bit like Lost of like, yeah, we know what's gonna happen. Actually, we don't really.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting too is like we talked about this with Twin Peaks, but Twin Peaks sort of
Mhm,
flows into the X-Files, and then the X-Files becomes really influential to a number of pieces of media that come after it. Sort
mhm,
of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you've got Supernatural, you've got even more recently like the Teen Wolf element of things. There's so many
mhm.
shows that sort of all roads lead back to X-Files. Have you, as you've watched media through watching the X-Files at the beginning and then kind of connecting as media continues to grow. Do you watch it and go, "Oh, that was the X-Files. They got it."
I mean, not so yeah, I mean, I do,
Yeah.
totally, yeah, and I've been doing that because 'cause it's been, like, 20 years now since that's what I've been doing that, and my wife's the more knowledgeable one on knowing all the specifics, so I wanted to throw out too. So back in the, again, this was late '90s, going into the 2000s, so when it was early early days kind of the internet, there wasn't as much information about, like, "Oh, what episode was that, and what number, and all this stuff." So they actually used to bring out each year these, episode guides with, like, these trade paperback books that we were collecting, like, we'd collect each season, each one, and they'd give you the episode, the number, and the name, and then details about it and all this stuff. So that's where I think, especially my wife just took in a lot of these names that she knew of all the various not just the cast members, but the crew that was involved on it. And I going tying into these other shows, a lot of these people have gone on to be involved in these various other shows.
Mhm.
My wife's the one who knows all the names and like, "Oh, yeah, that's so and so, and that's so and so on that show," or whatever, and bring it all back, and it's like, the reason it's, those shows are as good, I think.
Yeah, where it's sort of like the X-Files was the training ground, so to speak, and
Mhm.
then moving on. Yeah, and you see that with the same thing happening in those shows that we're talking about too, like when you look at Marty Noxon and you look at how she came
Mhm.
from sort of the Buffy camp and all those
Yep.
different things. Yeah, it's always fun when you can dig into the credits, so to speak, and play
Yep.
sort of 6 degrees of separation into the next shows. So with the trade paperbacks, you're basically saying it was almost like an X-Files specific encyclopedia or more like a printed IMDb?
Pretty much a printed IMDb of, like, that season. So you get, like, season 4 be a book, and it'd have, like, photos in there and stuff, usually black and white, and then have each episode listed with, like, a couple pages on each episode and details about it and stuff, and again, who was involved in it, the crew and stuff like that. But just that's where we kinda got our info because you couldn't just Google it, and it wasn't, even with the rerunning, it wasn't like, you had all the information you could get to know what episode was gonna air and when you get to rewatch stuff. I remember my wife, she actually taped a lot on videotape and was rewatching stuff that way.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so you really had to be a little bit more I don't wanna say, like, a stronger fan, but, like, you
Mhm.
had to put a lot more effort
Dedicated.
into it. Yeah,
Yeah.
dedicated. Dedicated is the right word, and I think one of the things I've been really interested in as we go through these, different episodes and talk about different pieces of media is how consumption habits have changed.
Mhm.
So, it's a lot easier to get all that information. For me wanting to watch The X-Files now, I can just press play.
Right, right, stream it service or whatever, yeah, that too.
Right.
I mean, I was thinking back to, like, we would buy the DVD box sets that were, like think of it like a giant, like, Bible, that's how thick these box sets were 'cause it
Yeah.
was all this, like, fold-out plastic, and they'd be, like, $100 plus each time, and
Yeah.
but we were getting them because it was how we could get it, otherwise we wouldn't be able to watch it.
Yeah, it was an investment. You had to really invest in what
Mhm,
you actually wanted to watch and keep watching.
mhm, and the cool thing again was at least they had extras on there, like deleted scenes and different things like that, which is kinda fun.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, that's really sort of something that we've lost now as in the
Mhm,
same space. We don't get sort of like the blooper reels, the
yep.
bonus, the behind the scenes. Did the X-Files box sets have a lot of that where you could kind of dig
It
in?
it was actually really cool, and I don't know if the new Blu-rays still do it. It was really cool because you turn it on kind of like, "Oh, you wanna have these extras available," and as you're watching the episode, this X would come up in the bottom left of the screen, and you'd click on the X, basically, with your remote or whether it was on your computer or not, and then it would cut and show you that the cut scene there, whatever it was, or the blooper or things like that.
Oh, like in line with the episode? Like in the scene?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Oh,
So
cool.
they'd cut out and then show you that little deleted scene, and then they'd cut back to the episode. For example, like in the first episode, I think towards the end of the episode, Scully gets a phone call at night and picks up the phone and talks to Mulder and then hangs up and then goes back to sleep. When the deleted scene, you actually get to see a man in the bed with her as well, but that was never even involved in
Oh.
the original, you're like, "Oh, someone else in the bed."
Oh, that's very
Well, there's
cool.
another one where it's specifically where they're, out in the rain,
Mhm.
over the coffin of the weird creature that's kind of a monkey-looking thing. It's like an outtake of them because they spent, like, hours in the rain, and they're just, like, cracking up and losing it as they're trying to get their lines right and stuff, and you're just like, they're so wet and soaked, but it's so entertaining because we get these little extra things.
That's so I really like the idea of it being kind of like in line while you're watching the episodes, almost like
Mhm.
a commentary of sorts.
Yeah.
Because I'm so used to sort of and maybe this is just a product of having been, like, at the edge of the DVD box set to the start of
Mhm.
streaming, but I'm so used to it just being, like, everything cut together for one season. You watch the bloopers, you can watch the deleted scenes sort of in
Right.
order.
Or like, I'm thinking of, like, my Lord of the Rings box sets where it's like, "Oh, you got 6 hours of bonus
Yeah.
footage." which you watch once and then never look at again.
Yes, you watch the extended cut all the way through, and then you say, "Okay, that was nice," and you go back to the theatricals. Yeah, that's interesting. I am thinking about my DVD box set era was, like, actually for Gilmore Girls, the TV show from ABC Family.
Yep. Mhm.
And that was great because, like, it's all in order and you have all of the bonus scenes and
Yep.
everything like that. But I would have loved to have been able to literally be watching the episode and sort of click to see more. There's something
Be
fun
able to
about
do
that.
that stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so much like, you'd know exactly when the box set was coming out, like, it was set all 3 months after the season's over, in Christmas time
Mhm.
and in whatever, just so much was set on regular schedules, and now it's just all different.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I think, like, it's almost the reverse of what we were talking about with having to be a little bit more dedicated to get the information or to watch things in order.
Mhm.
When you were watching it live, you had to buy these sort of trade paperbacks and go through all that
Yep.
information to
Mhm.
get the little facts.
Yep.
But then 3 months after the show finishes airing, you can sort of go to the store and buy every piece of information all in one space, versus now, if you want to be that type of fan, which I've noticed particularly with Succession, because everybody's watching it right
Mhm.
now, and I
Right,
am the
I've
type of
noticed.
person. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of this show, it's on HBO,
Half of
um,
Twitter is just a
just
Succession.
having a meltdown, but for me, I am the type of fan who wants every piece of information. Like, I wanna watch all of the interviews, I wanna watch all of the behind the scenes, and with Succession, I've noticed that, like, it's one of the few places where people are actually seeking it out intensely, and it's almost that
Mm,
same level of dedication that you had to have to get it,
right,
because it's not all just sort of, like, neatly packaged for you
right.
to watch the whole season together.
'Cause I
You
was
have
just
to go
thinking too,
back.
another thing my wife collected a lot of was, different magazines that would have interviews and covers of
Mm.
them, and they pushed up the romance a lot right from the beginning there and stuff. But she collected all this stuff because it was all out there, whereas for a lot of these other shows, it's less. I mean, there's plenty online, but it's less, like, out in the print world sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, you used to be able to get, I'm sure X-Files had this, and this is kind of what you're referencing, like the fan magazine where you could actually
Mhm.
buy an
Yep,
entire magazine on X-Files,
yep.
which is sort of like I call it like a lost art form dramatically, but,
Mhm.
like, it sort of does feel like that where you used to be able to kinda go to the grocery store and buy actual dedicated information on a piece
Right.
of media you
I
love.
guess the closest thing would be, like, a Discord channel now, right?
Yeah, right? Or, like, I think if you subscribe to Entertainment Weekly, you'll still get
Which my
ones for,
wife
like,
did for, like,
big.
15 years.
Yeah, I was an Entertainment Weekly girl in
Yep.
high school. I used to get
Mhm.
them every week, 52 52,
And it was
copies of it.
it's really good magazine, yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was a great
yeah.
magazine. I'm sure you can still get physical copies of it, but it's also not as, like,
Comprehensive
exactly what
or
we're talking
yeah.
about. Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
I remember,
'cause
like
it
and I
used to
remember really
be.
reading 'cause I remember at one point Stephen King was doing a back page column for stuff and things like that. I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, I wanna read that, Stephen King."
And certainly now, like, you can listen to people on podcasts, you can sort of have that, but it all seems very centered around a PR circuit
Mhm.
versus the way you're talking about X-Files, which is sort of just like every season, we're gonna give you every piece of information we have available for
And they had, I mean, a ton of other I mean, all the merch they had too, obviously the posters and things. There was a comic book series, a multiple comic book series. There was just, like, so much stuff that was coming out there. The music we were really into too that you were able to buy on CDs and things like that. Just yeah.
Yeah, it's a bummer too because now if you're watching it now, you don't have that.
Yeah.
If you watch it on, I think it's on Hulu. If you watch it on Hulu, there's not the bonus parts.
I would say we still have a I've still got my box set, giant X-Files that, like, folds out like a armoire or something with all the various, like
Oh, like
so we've got the I've got the Buffy cube here, we call it the Buffy
Oh, I
cube, which is
love
a nice
that.
little cube. The X-Files thing is this big giant trunk thing.
Yes, yeah, the I that was the other thing that was really cool about box sets is they used to make them like a collectible piece,
Mhm.
if you bought, like, the whole series at the end,
Yep. Mhm.
where you could sort of unfold it. I feel like we're talking, like, it was hundreds of years ago. It's really
But
not
it
that
I
long
mean,
ago.
but again, yeah, like, the internet was different 20 years. It's like
Yeah.
everything changes so fast, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's pretty cool though. I think so you were the type of person who collected those pieces afterwards.
Not all of them, like I said, the episode guides, I think I went through different phases.
Mm.
Definitely the early 2000s when eBay started to grow too, and I was like, I can get anything on eBay." Then dangerous addictions things started happening, like, I remember getting one, it's, an episode called The Host, I think it's season 2, like the 3rd episode, where I think it's a guy gets, like, mixed with an earthworm and radioactivity, and it's called Fluke Man, he's half man, half worm, and I had this, like, cool, like, standing thing where he's, like the Fluke Man is standing over a sewer thing, and it's just, like, really cool and well done and stuff, but my wife was scared of it, so we couldn't keep it in the bedroom.
That's so funny.
I do still have. Oh yeah, I mean, I brought him along. I still got Little Mulder action figure too.
Oh.
I don't know where we've probably had him for like 20 years, and then we had a Scully one too, but she hasn't survived. Though I can remember using because she came with like a flashlight and everything, and I can remember using her flashlight to hold up one of our bookshelves. It was like wedged in there. Weird little details and stuff like that you do. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you met your wife
Hmm.
literally like through noticing an
Yeah.
X-Files poster. So all of these collectibles that you're talking about, is that something that you guys sort of collected together throughout your time
Yeah,
together?
I think so. Yeah, we definitely had like a less so now, as we've over the years gotten older and had kids and stuff like that. Though it's you have to get rid of stuff, but we definitely collected a lot of these things. She had a lot of magazines and stuff saved. The best piece of memorabilia she has is she actually wrote a letter to actually 1013 Productions for the X Files to Vince Gilligan, just saying how much she liked the episode Bad Blood, which is in I think season 3 or so, but it's a fantastic episode. And he actually wrote her a letter back and then included a signed copy of the script with it. So that's her
Oh,
little piece of
wow.
thing that she will never get rid of. That's really special. Yeah.
I love that. That's so
And this is another
sweet.
thing that's one of these things I think earlier, again, in earlier days, I feel like you could do a lot more of this stuff, whereas now it's just because it's so much bigger and crazier, you can't really do anything like that anymore.
Yeah, there's just so much happening, like, in general. I think there's certain shows and some of those are still products of, like, having started early on,
Hmm.
like but, like, Supernatural, the new, Star Trek shows,
Hmm.
The Vampire Diaries, there are shows that are, like, doing those fan-dedicated
Yeah.
conventions where you can
Hmm.
go and have your sort of personal moment, but those aren't really I went to a Supernatural convention,
Hmm.
in January, actually, which was, like, my first big exciting fan thing, which is another show that probably wouldn't exist without the X-Files as so many would would say. But I think now the fan conventions are very much centric on the actors and the actors
Yeah.
only. There's no real like you're talking about being able to write a letter to one of the writers and just simply saying like, "I really liked what you did there."
And she didn't
And
do it saying, "Give me some free swag," or whatever. It was just like, "No, I just like
sure.
I wanted to let you know you're doing a great job." He was honored by it, and yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think both of us being writers can can say that if someone yeah,
Oh
no
yeah,
matter how successful you are, I think if someone simply just sent a nice
yeah.
genuine letter and was like, "I
You're
really
like,
liked
okay,
that,"
I'm framing this, and it makes my world better. Yeah, everything's a little brighter now.
I feel that way about, like, tweets, like,
Yeah,
genuinely, like,
totally. Yeah.
any nice nugget, I am constantly looking for it. I am constantly concerned.
So, speaking of conventions, we did go to one once. It was WonderCon, and it was when the second movie was coming out, and that's when they had WonderCon up here in San Francisco.
Mm.
And so we went there. We actually had a friend hold our spot a few hours before, and then we sat there for like at least 4 hours, I want to say, going through various panels or whatever before we got to the X Files one. We got to meet. What are you going to meet? We got to see one for. I think there was a little thing for Wally then, a little preview for that before that was out yet and stuff like that. But and then yeah, getting to actually see David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson was very cool on stage and stuff, and just yeah. And then in the awkward period when they do a Q&A and people ask really awkward questions, and you're like, we still remember there's one person. She was like my husband had a heart attack over the weekend and he's in the hospital, but I couldn't miss this, so I everybody were like, squeeze. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and
no.
you're just like,
Yeah,
"Really? This
that's
is" and the actors on stage are just like, we don't know what to say with this," this is a little too there's another person just, like, bawling as they're talking, it's just like, "Okay, this just needs to be a little better."
yeah, it's like the good and the bad. I think, like, sometimes it's so hard because some people at conventions when they ask questions and you can kinda see it, like, famously, you can watch, like, the Comic-Con panels
Mhm.
after they've
Right.
the San Diego Comic-Con panels, and that's something I used to be really, really intent on in high school. I would rewatch because I never
Yep.
got to go.
Right.
But if you watch them after, one of the things that you'll note like, I feel like everyone kind of has to deal with at a certain point in these larger fan base things is that there's not much screening that is
Yeah,
done
right.
of the people being of people asking questions. And then it is these moments where people say things that are just, either overly emotional or sort of out of pocket and then watching the actors and the creators try to navigate that is always it's just
It'd be
too
awkward,
much
yeah.
secondhand stress for me.
Well,
Yeah.
I was just thinking too of also I think a lot of these actors, well, they'll set it up that way to almost like bait people too and the fans and things like
Mm,
that. And I mean, thinking of like the Lord of the Rings ones that we're doing and things like that. Just they'll suggest things and things like that that might not be true or and insert
yeah.
stuff that's not really there just to kind of drum up more interest. And and support.
Yeah, always a little bit of fan service. There was famously the Teen Wolf team did that with 2 of the actors at, Comic-Con. They had 2 actors who were heavily shipped in the fandom
Mhm.
literally record videos on a boat, and they were like, "Oh, we're on a ship, ha ha ha, pun intended," and, like, cuddling and, like,
Yeah,
sleeping
yeah,
and, like,
mhm.
fun and it's like, okay, so you know exactly what you're doing. For you, does that cross, like, a line between canon being too involved with, like, fandom?
Yeah, I pretty much stay away from most of that, I'm not that into it. However, my wife, she writes fan fiction, and actually X-Files was her first fandom she got started writing in, and it's almost like I will hear from her about the explosions on Tumblr and Twitter and wherever they were arguing about it and all this stuff, and she enjoys it, but I'm more like, "Okay, right."
So you prefer to sort of, like, enjoy the show by yourself?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, for what it is, and just I'm feeling like, though, that might be changing now. I've gotten really into The Expanse. I love the show, and I've just loved the books, and just I feel like it's kind of the best sci-fi I've ever read and experienced and stuff, and so I'm, like, almost wondering, I need to dive into the fandom a bit now and get to I need more, and it's all over now, so it's like I need to find more of it somehow.
Yeah, what that's what fandom's for.
I will say too, there was, again, it was early 2000s when my wife was gonna meet up with some, fandom friends somewhere in LA or whatever
Mhm.
it was, and she must have taken a bus or something, and it was just like and she was, like, gone for 4 hours, and it was just like I don't think we had cell phones at that point. We're just like, "Nope,
Oh,
it's not an
no.
axe murderer." But then she came back, everything was fine, she had a fabulous time, and I think she's still in touch with these friends, 25 years later, but again, it was a different time of just, like, communication wasn't quite the same, and you didn't know what these people were like, whereas now, because you've been, talking and interacting with these people for years, probably online, that when you get to meet them, it's just like, "Oh, we're long lost friends," you know?
Sure, yeah, you just didn't have the ability to, like, share your location
Mhm.
at the time where you could you could be checked to make sure. Yeah, and it's so funny because now it's like almost everyone you meet is connected through the
Mhm.
internet now to a degree of either, like, through work, through I mean, online dating, there's just all of it is very much, "Yes, let us go meet a stranger
And
from the
especially
internet."
in podcasting because we're all spread out literally over the world, and it's just like
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
my, sound design guy that I have is I'm really close to, and it's just like we could have been friends as kids and all this stuff, but he lives in Western Australia, so it's like, I don't know if we'll ever meet.
Yeah, it's like I also don't even know that we're awake at the same
No,
time, so
in the early in the mornings and late at night, I catch him.
yeah, that's funny. So you kind of stay out of fandom spaces, it sounds like. But when you're looking at sort of, I guess, like the additional media from the cast and crew specifically, like when the writers are talking about the X Files or interviews, or if they give definitive answers on things, do you seek that type of information out, or do you really stick to just the episodes and what's there in your
I'd
interpretation
say
of them?
again, it was I do a little bit of it. My wife did all of that and was way more into it, whereas I'm more just like I'm enjoying the story, and I think this is what led to me creatively in writing and stuff too. Of just like I'm enjoying the mystery and the question of what's going on. Coming up with ideas and 'cause that's what I really liked. I think about the X Files is yes, they had the monsters of the week, but every monster was so different, and then they covered every kind of form of supernatural thing. And they even had William Gibson. I think he wrote at least one episode. Stephen King wrote an episode. Just all this different, like covered the whole spectrum of the unknown genre, the speculative fiction, like everything, every angle of it. And I think that's what really like jump started my creative process. And I definitely feel Ostium is, I mean, I have direct X Files reference in it many times. And my two main characters are like a man or a woman. It's definitely that similar dichotomy of my male characters like to dive in and do whatever, and female character has to kind of rein him in and hold him back, be like, "Hang on a second, you're going to jump off a cliff here." I mean, the joke always was with Mulder, if he sees something like some strange goo, he'll like pick it up and start touch it and smell it and taste it and stuff. You're like, "What are you doing? You need to think before you leap." But like I said, I think it's influenced my show, but even to the point where you can't just say Ostium is a sci-fi show. It has elements of horror and the supernatural, and like I said, it's more of a speculative fiction show that embraces all these subgenres a lot. And I think X Files is a direct result of that.
Yeah, I'm so curious. One of the things you talked about is sort of like the gender dynamics that are positioned in the X Files with Mulder and Scully. And I thought what was interesting watching it myself was that Scully is the female character, is the one who sort of has her head on her
Hmm.
shoulders and is the rational,
Yep.
logical one. Whereas Mulder, being your male character with David Duchovny, is very much
The loose cannon.
the loose cannon, yeah, very and he's pursuing something emotionally. It's coming from a sense of not wanting to let go of his
Yeah.
sister, of
What's driving him? Yeah.
yeah, and it's 100% illogical.
Yeah, but there's even like it's really a trope on the show of he will often like when he's so determined to find it, he will literally just drive off, and by the time Scully gets, she's like, "Damn it, Mulder, you did it again."
Was that one of the first times that you had seen those gender dynamics I don't want to say necessarily switched, but
Mhm.
it is pretty different to see that male character be the one who is sort of loose cannon emotional and very much like emotional, not angry.
Yeah,
I think like very because I think I get frustrated when people say like male characters aren't emotional, but like anger is an emotion.
exactly.
So therefore they are. They're very, very highly emotional,
Mhm.
but I mean, in the sense of different type of
Yeah.
emotional, the emotional that we typically ascribe to female characters.
Yeah, I don't know, 'cause I will say I would never have thought of it that way, but hindsight, looking back on it now, that probably was something that I was picking up on in some way and identifying with, and but I also feel like too I don't even think of them as genders or anything playing with that more, just they were like this cohesive unit that always worked together so well, and that's just what it felt like for me. It wasn't really, a different, specific dynamic in that way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out to me watching it was the idea of seeing like a male character who was almost softer
Mhm.
in which is not necessarily typical for a sort of buddy cop show
Mhm. Right.
or a
Right.
detective character. Whereas like I think within the first episode you really get the sense that he's used to being made fun of, very much seeking out answers but from a place of trying to really a place of love of
Mhm.
trying to find his sister or trying to understand what happened to his sister and denial.
And also just not giving a damn what anyone else really thinks, and they stick him in the basement, and
Yeah.
I think his first line is she's knocking on the door or whatever, and he's like, "There's no one here, but the FBI's most unwanted."
Yeah. I thought it was interesting to see a softer male character that early on, especially even some of the shows we're talking about, like Supernatural. You're not getting that same
Right.
dynamic. It is very much like hide the trauma behind grumpy male leather wearing character.
But then I'm thinking also of Buffy and of just, like, everyone just follows Buffy. Xander's a little bit of
Mhm.
the sort of character too, and definitely Giles of just like, "We're gonna suggest what you can do, but we know you can't tell you what to do, Buffy, because 'cause you're headstrong and we trust you."
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because it's like I and that's one of the shows that we can talk about is as
Mhm.
influenced by X-Files or at least like the taste for that type of show
Yeah.
being put together from the X-Files being so popular. And it is interesting where you start to see maybe a twist of it. And ironically, I think the shows that I'm thinking of are more after the X-Files, where I'm thinking like True Detective is a like detective cop show where
Right.
you very much are not getting nobody would accuse Matthew McConaughey of being a soft emotional man in that show.
Right. Especially for, like, 2 FBI agents too, and you'd be like, "Well, he's gonna be that, he's gonna be that," and yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they even make a nod to that in some ways when they will sometimes get partnered up with other agents, and that will be
Mhm.
that guy who will be, like, strutting around and doing the thing and stuff, and just yeah.
Yeah, I do think that The X-Files does a good job of giving you something different, at least. Did you find that those characters or that kind of difference in the sort of strong male character dynamic being a little bit more softer or emotional or the logic of the way it was presented with Scully? Did you find that that was something that you related to as something you wanted to see on screen at that time?
Looking back, I don't know. I can't thi
Yeah.
but again, thinking again of my own stuff I've been writing,
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm seeing it all there, like, the influences and everything are
Right.
there, like, I can see that with Ostium where the more emotional male character and the stronger female character who he needs her to get him where he needs to go and stuff like that, yeah, I'm seeing it all in
Yeah.
the stuff I write.
So it's certainly something that at least, struck a chord as good storytelling for you.
Mhm.
When you were connecting with your wife over the show, was it something that was like an instant connection where you were sort of like, "That poster, and I've got one
Yeah,
too?"
I think it was all just like then we started just, like, spouting back and forth of, like, all the we were both obsessively into the show and knowing a lot of the details and things like that, and then we got to, want to watch it together, and it became a big deal and all this stuff, and doing it everything together was really nice and helped bring us closer and closer. With relationships, it's you've gotta have stuff in common, and when you have something that's not everything you can have is in common, but, when you have a strong thing in common, it helps to make it a stronger relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something very cool about being able to connect over media specifically in like
Mhm.
a obsessive TV show because there's that moment where like you say, "Oh, like, oh, I like that," and then as you start kind of on top of each other talking, like it's almost like it doesn't really matter what else you have in common.
And there's, like, sayings from the I mean, we have a kind of a language almost, there's sayings from the show we use all the time and things like that, expressions, and there's episode, I'm trying to remember which one it is now, Little Green Men, I think it's season 2 or season 3 at the beginning, where Mulder doesn't want someone to press this button, so he says, "No ho on the rojo," 'cause there's a red button. And the thing we've been saying for, like, 25 years. And also I'd say just over this time too, it hasn't changed or stagnated at all. Or one of us hasn't been as into it anymore or whatever. We
Mm.
still just, like, have a special fondness for the show, and we'll sit down every few years and watch it together and, enjoy it together. I mean, I have my ringtone for my wife when she calls is the X-Files theme.
Oh, is it something that you guys, like, had the same opinions on, or did you find did you disagree or argue about certain parts of the show?
I think we agreed on a lot of the stuff. I think again because we had a similar level of neither one of us like fully believed, like we all kind of knew there was it was fiction and stuff like that too, and a lot of it was made up. We're both kind of non-religious, so that kind of helped too. I feel like that's the other thing we haven't really talked about too, because Scully is Catholic on the show, and her religion becomes a big part of
Mm.
how she balances science and religion, and with what's going on in her life and things like that too. But I think again with my wife and us, me both being non-religious, it helped. I feel like if one of us had been religious, it might have been different in that way. But because of that, we're a lot on the same footing with everything.
I'm always interested because I think sometimes when you connect over fandom or over, like, being a
Mhm,
fan of a TV show or movie or something like that, a lot of times it means that you have sort of shared underlying values as well
mhm,
because you're connecting in the same way to that media. It sounds like that's partially what as you started on the surface level with X-Files,
mhm.
and then as you go down, you sort of find that you're connecting to it because you come from similar spaces.
Exactly, and I think that shows too in shows we've gotten into together over the years too, we both enjoyed, whatever, and it's like, well, that's because it has these same similar sort of, connections and what's going on in an emotional level and moral level and all this stuff, yeah.
Yeah, did you guys find that you had, like, similar backgrounds growing up at all, or that it was just more like the morals that you came to as the end of your adulthood?
Yeah, I think it different. I mean, again, my mom's Catholic, but, she didn't, like, have us baptized or anything like that. It was more just like, we'll let them decide when they're older what they wanna do. And my dad wasn't religious, and it was a kind of a similar thing with my wife where, her family wasn't religious at all too, really. Kinda similar in that vein, but otherwise not that similar, but I think, again, what you're talking about, that level, I think was kinda similar with how we saw things in the
Yeah.
world, and, I mean, it could be why we've been together so long and still get along really well and
I would
all
hope
stuff,
so, yeah. I was gonna
It's
say
like, we
see,
don't
I
argue
mean,
much at
I
all,
hope
we
it's
see we talk about everything all the time and stuff, so yeah.
and you guys have kids of your own now?
So we got 2 kids, a 9-year-old and a pandemic baby who's 16 months now.
Oh my goodness. Oh, a pandemic baby.
'Cause the pandemic was supposed to be over, right? And then it wasn't.
How is that? How is raising a pandemic baby when you have to I just watched all these TikTok videos of parents
Mhm.
being like, "We're taking the child to the mall so that it can see the outside."
Really freaking hard is what I say. My wife's also disabled, so that's been tough too, 'cause we got COVID at the beginning of it too, and just, like, we got
Mm.
COVID, like, when the baby was, like, 2 months old, and she was still breastfeeding, and just it was very long and
Oh,
tough
no.
time, and she's had some other complications and things like that, but yeah, with the baby, like, this Easter, like, we just had Easter Sunday, so we went and saw some family, and just, like, being in their house without masks on and seeing some family and having him hang out with the kids, I mean, with the family was kind of a new thing because he's really only seen, like, doctor's offices and hospital rooms and our house, like,
Oh,
he
wow.
really hasn't been in and being in California, as you know, the weather has just been ridiculous this year with all the rain, so he's like he's never going outside
Yeah.
that much either. So, he was kinda weird at everything at first, like, "What are all these people doing here, and what do I do?" and stuff, and then hour down the road, "Oh, I'm okay now," and he's having fun meeting with everyone and doing stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so he's, like, probably not familiar with, like, the lower half of a
Yeah,
face in general. Um, so you have a nine-year-old as well. Is the X-Files something that you're gonna share with your kids, do you think?
definitely, I'm pretty sure, or at least, like, see what they wanna get into, if they like it or not. We're kinda waiting for him to be the kinda right age to get into stuff.
Yeah, it's spooky.
And it's again, this is kinda what I wanted to talk about earlier because compared to how we used to watch stuff before and you had to buy DVDs, whereas now it's like he puts the TV on, it's like, "Oh, do I do Netflix or Disney Plus?" And I can get everything I ever wanted, just touch of a button, whereas, like,
Yeah.
before it was like you had, like, 3, movies, Disney movies you'd watch over and over because that's all you could have, you know?
Yeah, does he obsess over anything since he could have pretty much the he's spoiled for choice, I would assume?
He went through definitely when he was younger, he went through phases of different things, and actually right now, our little one, it's, Daniel Tiger is his obsession, and it's kinda funny that it's a really nice show, and it's off of the Mister Rogers' Neighborhood type of thing, and it's like a kinda modernized cartoon version with a tiger, but again, the lessons in it are really nice, it's a really nice show compared to some of the other kid shows that we watched with our other kid when he was younger that we didn't like so much, but some of it's weird because you can just turn this on and he'll be, like, so happy, and he'll just sit there and watch and stuff, and it's just that show, anything else Bluey, he's kind of into as well. but not as much. Just like Daniel Tiger's a switch you can do with him. Whereas with the older kid, he goes through phases. Like Camp Cretaceous was one that was on Netflix. It's like a group of teenagers get stuck in Jurassic Park without any adults. I have to
Oh,
fend for
yes,
themselves.
I've heard about this.
And it's like 7
Yeah,
seasons
yeah.
of it, and it's, like, really well done, it's diverse, it's really well done and everything, but he was just like, that was that for a year or 2 of just, like, religiously watching that and stuff, and then switched over to another thing. I mean, now everything's Minecraft, that's his big thing.
Yeah, I've been so curious if, like, the generation sort of coming up now will have the same obsessive personalities
Mhm,
when it comes to media because, like, most of it comes out pretty
mhm,
quickly. There's a lot of shows now that are sort of returning to the weekly basis, but especially sort of like teen and kid media, a lot of that is just it's out, it's available. Once it's
right.
there, you can watch the whole thing.
And it's hard to say because I don't experience or watch it as much because it's not for me,
Sure.
but it does feel like before you used to have more time to, like, really obsess over something and enjoy it, whereas now everything gets turning over so fast, like, in 6 months, there's something new thing again that you gotta focus on and become obsessed with, so it
Yeah.
feels like they can't really have enough time to get really locked into something and stay with it before they move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because, like and this is more teen
Mhm,
media than, like, a nine-year-old, I would say, but certainly, like, the shows I was watching when I was, like, 11, 12, 13, and then all the way through high school, those were shows that had, like, a 22-episode season and sometimes took, like, a break in the
mhm,
middle, and the 22-episode season just does not really exist anymore.
nope,
So it's like you could really stay hyper-focused and obsessed on something because it was on for half the year every week.
right.
And then sort of like by the summer, you were going out, hanging out with your friends, but like during the school year, every Wednesday night, you watched the same show for the entire half of a year. So you could really make your entire personality two television shows. Even the shows that are still doing, like the CW is still doing like a 22 episode. A lot of those shows that like the Winchesters only did half a season this
Mhm,
season or a full season, but a half order. I think they only did 10 or 11
mhm,
and those were weekly, but
right.
it was sort of like they didn't order the second
But I
half.
don't know if that was solely because of, yeah, influenced by British TV because they have much shorter seasons and stuff, but we find that now too with new shows where it's like we're talking about like, "Oh, X-Files used to be 22, 24 episodes a season." It's like, forget that now, it's like, I don't know if I can be invested that much in, just because everything's so fast-paced these days and you only have so much time for everything.
I really miss it though.
Mhm,
Because I've noticed with a lot of at least on the, like, genre supernatural style television shows, a lot of times I feel like when we don't get the 22 episodes, we are rushing through, like,
mhm.
I think certain shows should have the 22
Well, I think,
episodes.
part of the reason it's changed that way is because shows had more leeway, definitely in the '90s and going to the
Mm,
early 2000s. It just shows like The X-Files where it's like you give a show, 3 episodes now, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna cancel it," or whatever, or you get 6 episodes where it's not grabbing, it's not got the ratings or whatever. Whereas X-Files got, like,
sure.
3 seasons or whatever to get their footing and really, like, find the story they wanted to tell because you don't always know right at the beginning of how you wanna tell the story and what story you wanna tell and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned is sort of like the invention of the Monster of the Week format,
Mhm,
and then the underlying overall arc that's happening between so one of the things that I think is interesting about that too with what we're talking about and sort of the way media has shifted in consumption habits is that the way you described it is once you found X-Files, you can't really remember what episode it was, what season it was, how
yep.
much of it you had watched, and then in college you had to wait, and then they were kind of doing reruns, and then you could get the box set. So they had to make TV in a way that you could tune in and watch one episode and understand what was going on to
Right.
hopefully hook you to come back and then eventually go find it.
And I'd say the same thing's definitely true of Star Trek as well too, because it's like, well, you don't care whatever episode's on, you just want it it's Star Trek, "Oh, good, I'll enjoy this," yeah.
Yeah, do you prefer that type of storytelling where, like, you could play any episode of The X-Files for someone and just explain
Mhm.
the one thing that's missing, and they sort of explain that in the beginning of every episode?
Right, I think it was good, I think, to have that as an option of just throw it on or whatever when it's on, but then also still have those box sets that you can go religiously through from start to finish.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's similar with some of the shows that we've mentioned that existed after The X-Files that were very much sort of inspired by, so, like, Supernatural is similar, Buffy is similar, where you certainly could jump in and get tied in enough that you eventually go, "Okay, I just have to find a way to get the rest of it."
Yeah, especially with, like, Buffy, because if you start right at the beginning, it's like, you need to don't start with the movie for a start too, 'cause
Yeah,
that's not
certainly
good.
not the movie.
And even Buffy, it takes a while to get its real footing, and then it's just like and there's some incredible, like, runs and a series of episodes that are just like, it's such good TV.
Yeah, it's, I think when we did an episode on Buffy with, Gabrielle Urbina, who's also in the fiction space with us.
I listened to that one, yep.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the things we talked about was, like, somehow he started on season 4.
Mhm.
But it's interesting how I think now, I don't know if you watched like last week's episode, you could know what was going on, you could be interested
Right.
and jump back and go all the way to the beginning. And I don't know that that's like a bad thing or a good thing. It's just that television now is very much linear and made to watch from like episode 1 and catch up.
Which again could be the Netflix thing of they want you to,
Sure.
you know, marathon everything and do everything in one go and get everything together and not just bits of it. Which is hard though, because online everything's little clips and scenes and everything. So
Yeah, I do wonder if it's really just a product of like writers being able to say like, "Oh, well, now it's so easy for you to access episode 1, like go watch it from
yeah,
the
yeah.
beginning."
I would say with Buffy too, the first episode I watched was
Oh
Hush.
my god.
And everything was around Halloween, and they were just playing it all up as this cool Halloween episode, and there was a little trailer thing for it. I was like, "This looks really good." I can't remember if my wife was watching at that point, but she kinda told me about it. I was like, "No, that doesn't sound good at all. I don't wanna watch it." And then I watched this episode, I was like, "Man, that was really good." And that's still, like, my favorite Buffy episode. And then I went back to actually
Oh,
watching it with her and stuff and getting into the show.
yeah, yeah, again, Buffy is one that I watched from the beginning on Hulu late in life and really enjoyed. I think there's so many things about that show that are really interesting and well done. And what's so funny is so many people told me like, "Oh, season 1, you really just have to push through." But I was like, I found it delightful. Like I had a lot of fun
Well,
with
again, coming with a
season
completely
1.
open mind, but knowing a little bit what to expect, but also just coming with a completely open mind and knowing it will get better or whatever if you're not enjoying it, but then
Yeah,
it's kinda like when Dude, Where's My Car came out, if you remember that movie?
I love that movie.
We had, like, the lowest expectations, and there were other movie theaters like, "That was a great movie."
I absolutely love that movie. I still quote that movie with some of my friends, and I just think it is so funny. I really do believe like the low bar comedy is not respected enough. I
Mhm,
love a low hanging fruit comedy. I
mhm.
love like thoughtful comedy and stuff that takes a lot of attention. But I also there is something in like the Dude Where's My Car, the Ashton Kutcher, the Punked, the Jackass, and maybe it's just like a product of being part of the MTV
Mhm.
generation. But there's something so soothing about it to me.
Kinda like, the Seinfeld people who just have it on in the background is like, "Oh, this is my happy place," or whatever.
Yeah, it's just like a nice like a friend like the people who have friends. I love to watch people fall off of things and be pranked. This is my dream.
So I will say, like, X-Files originally started as a, you know, small show that wasn't that popular. It was on Friday nights. That's what it used to air for, you know, all the nerds not doing anything and staying at home. And then it became this giant behemoth, you know, popular show and was moved to Sunday nights after The Simpsons, I think it started, and like the prime time
Oh,
spot
wow.
and all this stuff. Yeah. But definitely after like we kind of start to tail off in season 7, and I think they did 8 and 9, and especially when David Duchovny left and all this stuff, it just really felt like, well, the show kept wanting to make more money with the show and all this stuff, and it definitely felt like the show went downhill for us. There were some like interesting little episodes here and there throughout, but really 8 and 9 is where we kind of just like we're done with the show for in some
When
ways.
you rewatch, do you stop? Like, do you
We
stop at
yeah,
7?
those ones I may have watched maybe once or twice, those episodes, and that's it, yeah. And, like, the second movie that they brought out, like, we started to watch it and really didn't like it, just didn't work for it was a weird story too. It wasn't really so much supernatural, it was like a weird yeah, it was he was a serial killer or something, but it was like a child molester, just like, this is just like, "Oh, it's not working for us." And I think because we'd had maybe so much at that point of enjoying it for years and years, it was like, "It's okay if we don't enjoy this part, you don't have to enjoy everything."
Yeah, you can sort of like draw your own line where the story stops, so to speak.
Right. But then interestingly, like 5 years ago, they started doing Audible did like some audiobooks, but it actually had David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson doing voices for it, and all the other characters too.
Mhm.
And those were fantastic. Those felt like classic old X-Files episodes that I really enjoyed, and again, that was during my, you know, being into, audio fiction too, so it definitely filled that hole in many ways.
Oh, I'll have to check those out. I did not know that they did
Yeah,
those. Yeah.
they're
Um,
fun.
and it's also interesting too because I think Gillian Anderson has stayed relevant for so long that she has so many different like connections to each generation. Like right now she's on
Mhm.
Sex Education and people are very familiar with
Which
her
we
for
love.
that.
Yep.
Oh, she's so good in it too.
Yep.
It's so stressful but so good. Every time she does something I'm like, "Oh, please."
No, my wife has a psychology degree, she's just like, "No, what are you doing? You can't say that with your kid."
Yeah, I was like, "I think this is malpractice."
Yep,
I love you. You look so good in that outfit, but
yep,
um,
crossing a line.
yeah, it's just we've stepped too far. And then David Duchovny is interestingly enough connected to Twin Peaks, which we kind of talked about earlier as like a predecessor for the X-Files, which then expands into such an intense space.
And I feel like that was definitely an influence on Chris Carter making the X-Files
Mm,
with his because he's an FBI agent on Twin Peaks and what they were doing with that show, I think, influenced him with making the X-Files.
Yeah, I know for me, like, my connection to Gillian Anderson obviously came from more recent media and then going back.
Mhm.
But I think also for me, I was like, I mean, I'd like to see what made Gillian Anderson Gillian Anderson.
Right.
Do you feel like there's a world where like the X-Files works without those 2 actors, or that those 2 actors and those
No.
writers, it's like a perfect storm? Yeah.
Definitely not. No, I mean, it is a show. We were talking about it the other day too, just, because I had a crush on her, and it was just, like, early computer days where I had a cool, like, wallpaper image of her, and she helped my wife help make it and do pictures of her and all this, and then my wife was acknowledging the other day, I think I had a crush on her too, that's what it was I was really enjoying with the show, just, like, and I feel, yeah, if you take them, I mean, again, this shows because as soon as they were kinda gone from the show, like, the later seasons,
Mhm.
it didn't have the same magic for us.
Do you think a X-Files now works, or do you think it needed the era that it was in?
There's a little bit of the era it was in because we all this information wasn't available
Mm,
at their fingertips. Yeah, a lot of stuff like when you add cell phones into everything, and especially our cell phones today that are computers basically in our hands.
sure.
Like a lot of stuff you can just look up right away or get this stuff, call them right away. Whereas on the X Files, it was like the flip phone with the antenna thing that didn't always work, and you couldn't get any information right away. You had to research it at the library or wherever it was.
Right.
So that'd be a little different. But I definitely think there's a way you could still make it interesting, and because it's still there's still mysteries in the world. Same reason they redid Unsolved Mysteries and stuff like that.
Sure.
And we're all still writing speculative genre, so there's still plenty more to explore.
Yeah. Part of why I wanted to ask that question is that the creator of X-Files did just, it seems like perhaps prematurely, reveal that Ryan Coogler is working on a reboot of the X-Files, and that the angle is to be a little bit more diverse with the show.
Mhm.
I don't know if it was intended because it was in text, but I'm not sure if it was intended to be sort of like snooty about it, but he did say like, "Good luck to him. We sort of did everything." That's not the exact quote. I could pull the exact quote, but
So when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, I'd be totally game for this. I'd be totally because again, they're doing something new and different is the key."
mhm,
And I definitely feel X-Files has a number of episodes where we're like, "We're just not gonna watch this episode because it's ick or it's a little bit racist or it's a little, whatever it is," just like,
sure.
we're not gonna do that anymore. Just like with certain things we don't show our kids because it's just like, "No, you don't need to see this because the message in it is bad." And a lot of these older shows, even Firefly and stuff, they're just like, "Nope."
Yeah, there are moments where it's a little too much. Yeah, the quote
Mm,
that he said was, "I just spoke to a young man, Ryan Coogler, who's going to remount the X-Files with a diverse cast." And then he
mhm.
says, "So he's got his work cut out of him, out for him because we covered so much territory." Which I just thought was interesting. I was like, I just thought it was an interesting way to put it, sort of like
Mm.
that, yeah, okay, you did, but it sounds like he's going in a different direction. And it's always curious to me, like, where obviously that's all of the information we have,
Right.
right?
That's what I was trying to like, "Is there more? Is there more?" "No, this is it." "Oh,
It's
okay."
literally it.
I'm
It's just
still interested. But I was just thinking, another show that came to mind real quick was, Sleepy Hollow, which we
mm,
both really enjoyed. And that definitely had, like, kind of an X-Files vibe.
yeah.
But again, it was a more diverse cast and just did more interesting things. We're like, "Yeah, this is what it's doing newer things that the X-Files didn't do," and this is why both my wife and I really enjoyed it, and then they canceled it.
I actually did not watch Sleepy Hollow, but I do remember maybe that's why it got canceled. I do remember the PR. Me personally, if I had watched it, I could have saved it. Um, But yeah, it's always interesting when I think, like, you watch these beloved shows that when you go back and watch it, you're like, "Ooh, that certainly
Yeah.
came out in the '90s."
Again, that's the nice thing about X-Files because 'cause you've got 22 episodes a season, and we've got 7 plus seasons. It's like, "Okay, we can skip this one. We never need to watch this one again. It's okay."
Yeah, you can skip the bad ones. It's totally fine.
Especially with the exoticizing of different cultures and religions and things like that, and you're just like, "No, we're not gonna do this one. There's lots of other great episodes that we can enjoy."
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, I think, like, watching shows and franchises sort of try to reckon with that now,
Mhm.
where you were making the show in an era where that was what it was, like, people were putting those things on television, they weren't casting people outside of sort of the white monolith of cast at the
Mhm.
time, and putting things on TV that, as you're mentioning, like, are perhaps not messages you want your children to see or to
Right.
internalize. And now I think what's interesting is, like, it's always hard when you look at it and you say, "Okay, well, this show did a very bad job of that," but it opened the door for shows that then later on got to do,
Mhm.
something more interesting. Though I think every show we've listed is perhaps not not the most
No, no.
diverse ever,
But
as
there's
we go,
future
like
shows,
Buffy.
and I feel like, again, in my writing, I'm more aware of that now and wanting to change it.
Yeah.
Work every time I can when I'm adding something new to be more diverse and more inclusive and representative. because of all this earlier stuff that didn't do it at all.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting too, though, because I would say, like, for myself as a creator who is not white or male, it's always interesting to look at it and say, like, okay, so the X-Files existed, which was not diverse at all, and then sort of inspired these other shows, which were also not super diverse. But then the next wave of shows was a little bit more diverse, and those are the shows that I was watching growing up, and now I can watch those shows and say, man, I really want to make something that fits in that space. And so it's interesting because it takes way too long, but those shows still do sort of inspire the generation of people who then
Yeah.
make the more diverse content. And it almost sounds like, as you're saying for yourself, as someone who perhaps does like fit more into those types of content and seeing yourself represented on screen more often, you're still watching it and saying, man, I don't like that, and I gotta find a way to adjust my own content that I'm putting out in the world to fit.
I mean, it shows, I think, too, with like the astronauts they just announced for the
Mm.
Artemis 2 mission of just like, yeah, because the other people have been to the moon are white guys,
Yeah.
and we need to change that.
It'd be nice to put some other people on the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you were able to sort of watch, and then through lack of them doing what you wanted them to do, you
Hmm.
can start to say, like, this actually is not representative of the world that I am a part of, and I
Right.
want my media to be representative. So it's like by the failing of something that you really love, you're able to make your own work a little bit more diverse, or at least striving to solve that problem.
Right. And you don't have to say, well, this is the original, it's the best thing and can't be, critiqued in any way. It's like, no, everything has failings and we're always trying to strive to do better and learn.
Yeah.
Um, but you build on top of that, and a new thing can be just as good in some ways, and as long as it's not just doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, I'm excited to see, like, what does Ryan Coogler, who is someone who
Mhm.
probably obviously has a connection to the show as a fan, where does he say, okay, well, this is what I really liked about it, and here's how we can make it for the current generation and to make those changes. So I am interested to see it, but I am curious how he's going to deal with the fact that essentially, like, does seem like that Scully and Mulder will sort of not have those moments of like, oh man, if you had
Mhm.
just gotten here, I just took a video of it on my iPhone, so I can prove to you that aliens are real.
Yeah, but now with AI.
Exactly. You could have edited that. I can't prove it. I guess, there's a lot of shows that I sometimes, like you said, with the invention of the cell phone, does the plot still hold up?
Definitely on Buffy, that would have changed a lot of things.
Yeah, like, "Hey, you have got to get over here." Something that I always have trouble with is I'm like, "Oh, you could have sent a text, or you could have," and so sometimes
Mhm.
those shows that endure for as long as they do, it almost feels like it's because you're like, you can watch it and be like, "Oh, man, I don't know how I could have solved that situation without a cell phone." Let's see these plucky teens put it together. Um,
Yeah, you're thrown in a house without your cell phone.
yeah.
A haunted house. I can remember, I think it was one of the first video games they brought out of the X-Files. It must have been somewhere in the early 2000s or whatever, and it's very cool because you got to play the lead agent on it,
Mm.
and it was all just like it was on the desktop and you're clicking and everything, and then, like, they actually did the voices, David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson did, and then you're, like, trying to solve a mystery and use the phones. You bring up the phone and you click and slowly dial and call them and stuff, but it's all just, like, making calls and a little bit of computer stuff, but not much else to kind of research stuff, whereas now everything's just so different but I feel just with all the new technology and all the things we're pushing forward, there's lots of stories to be told in that and mysteries to be solved as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure, at least I would assume, there will be a level of, like, conversation about misinformation on the internet as well, because just
Mhm.
as much as everything is sort of at your fingertips, the wrong answers are also at your fingertips,
Yep.
being said that they are the correct ones. And so I wonder how much of, like, an exploration of the X-Files now has to be a conversation of what is true, what's not, and how easy it is to sort of give false information in the world where everything is at your fingertips.
I'd also be interested in that take on law enforcement people and how they kind of handle that with everyone's opinions on it and at least address it in some way and talk about it.
Yeah, like, the cop procedural is still quite popular. It's still,
Mhm.
it's
Still
still
ca and it's still pretty much the same exact framework that just
yeah.
keeps.
It
Yeah.
so it'll be interesting to see if the angle is to sort of modernize it. How do you reconcile sort of the idea of FBI, of detective work, and is there a conversation about corruption, about morality?
Lines being crossed and different things, yeah. I'm excited, yeah, very excited if it comes.
You touched on your own personality being on the sort of mid space between, Scully and Mulder, and, I'm curious sort of if there was a space where at any point you really identified with one or the other, and that it, because it sounded almost like you started in one spot, and as you grew up, got closer to
Gravitated,
another.
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, it was more starting in Mulder and gravitating towards Scully. So, I was just thinking of it now, even though I'm not really a believer in astrology, I am a Gemini, so maybe that explains everything.
Yeah, did it feel like it was sort of like the growing up aspect of it that pushed you closer to the logical side of when you were younger, wanting to believe and wanting to be interested in that space?
I
And
think so, and as I learned more and understood the way the world worked more and the way everything worked, learning more, like, specifically about science, biology, and continuing to not be religious or anything like that too, just, seeing everything that way, just like it became clearer for me and being like, "Okay, now I kinda know without question."
and kind of leaning on that logic side of things.
But still, like, there's still a little bit of mystery, like, there's still some things we can't explain or whatever, so that's where Mulder still survives.
I think the show does a good job of Scully also having that little hint of not wanting to, not fully
Mhm.
shutting it
Right.
off. Did you feel like when you met your wife, did she sort of, did you guys have that sort of shorthand of like, oh, are you, which character are you, or did you discuss sort of that idea as well?
No, I don't think so, and I realize now we never dressed up for, Halloween ever. Would have been a great
Really?
Halloween costume to do. Yeah. She did also have red hair at that point, which definitely helped.
I think this has actually been great. It's been fun to kind of talk
Mhm,
about like the journey that you've had and the connections that you've made
mhm.
through it. But I will probably go ahead and ask you my final question I always ask, which is,
Well, what could it be?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you've heard. If you had never watched the X Files, what would be different about you today?
I don't know if I'd be a writer for a start, I don't think. I feel like my creative drive wouldn't be there in the same way. Also, having some of these interests in the supernatural and things like that, I may have not have led to the science that happened later on. I definitely feel just with my writing, I wouldn't have been creatively driven in the same way because I was so inspired by the range of stories that I got from the X-Files and seeing the potential of where you could go with all this stuff, and then being able to explore that in writing that I didn't know I could do.
Mhm. And then do you think you and your wife would have connected over something else, or do you think that was really that?
Possibly, but maybe yeah, well, the joke is she needed to get her computer fixed, and that's why I came over and then spent the night.
So she was certainly interested to
Um,
begin with.
yeah, so there was that to do. Yeah, that she was whatever, but, probably would have found some other things, but it's been very much a jumping board on many other things we've been interested over the years,
Mm.
and like as we kinda talked about, we found it's a common core between the both of us that's been an important part of our relationship, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's lovely.
And we'll try and instill it in our kids. That'd be the goal.
Yes. You can give them the posters themselves to keep in their dorm room for another love at first sight sort of situation. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me, Alex, and I really enjoyed this conversation and talking about like one of the most influential pieces of media I think that exists in this space of television.
It was a joy to talk about X-Files for over an hour, which I probably haven't done in a while.
Between now and next Wednesday, if you want to keep in touch, you can follow me on social media at Marissa Kamari, anywhere you get your social media fix. You can also sign up for my newsletter by going to our website, tandonproductions.com, clicking on You Are What You Love, and signing up there. I send out an issue with every episode of this podcast. And we just started a Discord server, so if you want to connect with me, with other listeners, and talk about the types of things that we are talking about on this show, you can join that by clicking on the link in the episode description. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.